Welcome back to the Matside, the podcast at intermatwrestle.com that runs back the results of all major happenings in wrestling. I'm your host, Richard Anderson Mann. Joining me as always, Clay Sauertieg. Clay, how's it going?
Good to be back, as it is every week. Tons of wrestling over this past weekend and a lot to talk about I'm looking forward to.
Absolutely. Ton of wrestling. We are going to run down the finals of the U.S. Senior Nationals in all three styles. But before we do, I have been instructed to let everyone know that you need to like the video. You need to subscribe to the video. What was told to me is that we are doing hundreds of views and they want to be doing thousands of views. I don't know. I can only do so much just tweeting it. So like, subscribe, or I'll send Clay after you. So
tell a friend to tell a friend, rate, review. Tell us what we can be doing differently. Get those views up, guys. We appreciate you listening.
Make it go viral like Russian propaganda. There you go. Anyway, like I said, we're going to run down U.S. Senior Nationals starting. We're going to go Greco, then women's freestyle, then men's freestyle. We're going to start at the lowest weight. So 60 kilograms, Greco Roman, Alex Thomsen of Nebraska taking on Moses Schwartz of Northern Colorado. I guess before we get started about the match, there was a lot more college flavor in the Greco ranks. There's been some conjecture that perhaps this was due to the availability of Olympic red shirts. I can't really speak to that, but I like to see it. It was a different look, and in the lowest weight class, we had two college guys making the finals.
Yeah, I know Thomsen and Schwartz both have decent Fargo accolades when it comes to Greco, but I am more familiar with them on the folk style side, both really talented prospects in folk style. Thomsen, I want to say, was an Iowa high school kid when he was out at Nebraska, and Mosha Schwartz, who kind of bounced around to a couple different schools, and I believe at one point was a Wyoming Sem. But I was a big fan of coming out of high school. And it's going to be I want to say true sophomore, because I don't think he redshirted this past year for Northern Colorado, but I'll check on that. But both two really good folk style prospects who have some decent some Fargo accolades in Greco, and obviously put together a really good tournament here to reach the finals.
All right, so the match started out. Thomsen got an early step out. He was pretty much able to get to an underhook whenever he wanted. Schwartz countered the underhook, and he got a bit of a headlock in a scramble and scored a takedown to go up 2-1. However, then Thomsen really took over. He got to the body twice, scored a pair of takedowns. And then late in the match, Schwartz was trying to get back in the match and push through and got another step out. But it was pretty much Thomsen the whole way. He took it 5-3. And like I said, I mean, I think for two guys who don't necessarily focus on Greco, I thought Thomsen had the better game plan. You know, he was getting to underhooks whenever he want. And, you know, if you're going to wrestle Greco, it's fine to go for a wizard once in a while. But I think that Schwartz was kind of going to that a little much. And ultimately, he surrendered position and points that way.
Yeah, Schwartz is known for being a bit funky in folk style, so it doesn't kind of surprise me. He takes maybe a different approach. Really impressive. You mentioned that Thomsen was able to get to the body, which is not easy on Mosha Schwartz. I mean, throughout high school, I think I saw him from 120 pounds up to 138, and he's got every bit the length to be at 138 or 141 in college. So you're dealing with a longer, taller guy, so it's not easy to get through there and work. So you really got a hand fight and dig those underhooks to get into the body. So really impressive from Thomsen to kind of show that fight, to be able to get through the hands and get into the body. Two really young guys, so it's interesting to see how much they stick with Greco going forward, because obviously there's some talent there.
Absolutely. And I think that, you know, talking about more college guys getting into Greco, regardless of how you feel about like the differences, the styles of the transition between the two, when we see these tournaments, we see that the college guys are the guys in the room getting the most reps and coming in the best shape. And I think that the absence of a lot of those guys from the Greco ranks sort of just turns into like practice partners wrestling each other a lot. And I think that anytime we can do to get new blood in Greco and get new looks, even if they're not similar to the looks that people see internationally, I think that's a win. So I was happy to see it. I hope it continues.
Absolutely.
All right, moving up to 67 kilograms. Benji Peak scored an 8-0 tech over Calvin Germinaro. It was pretty much a goad from the go. He got a takedown right off the bat, leg foul. The referee missed the leg foul. He called his own match, got the challenge. They gave him the 2 points, and then he elevated for a throw for 4. He was the OW of the Greco tournament. He looked great, and just a little preview of something I'm working on for Intermat this week. He averaged 10.87 points per minute in Greco, which is absolutely absurd. I believe the next down was like 5.3 or something. So he was far and away a point scoring machine. And, he didn't get to show much in this match because he had 8 points in the first period and ended.
Peak's one of those guys too that I am honestly not. I'm kind of in Greco. I will watch it. I enjoy it. But one of the criticisms is obviously that it's sometimes the scoring. Hard to have that criticism of Benji Peak, like you said. I think 10.8 points per minute. Really rolled through just about everyone he saw at tournament. One of those kids that is at or was at Northern Michigan with their Olympic Greco program. So really good place to kind of pick that up on. Whereas Germinaro is coming from Minnesota Storm, which is another program that we repeatedly see put out Greco talent. But Peak was just unstoppable. Really, I thought hand fought well throughout the tournament, got to his positions. And when he got there, he was really explosive. If he's one of those guys that you take and say, okay, you're not a Greco fan, go watch Benji Peak wrestle because you'll become a Greco fan.
Absolutely. And I think, we see this once in a while. We see guys come in and they're abnormally active and point scoring in Greco, and then they run into the veteran guy who's been grinding. And that's really we'll put a halt to all that and stop it. I think the fact that a guy like this is able to break through and win a national title, even if it is kind of like a non-traditional field with the pandemic and everything, I think that's a good thing, showing that being wide open and scoring a lot of points is a legitimate path to victory of a major tournament.
Yeah, and I think more so even that the Greco fields, maybe not at 69, but throughout, had some big names. We'll talk about that later at 77 and 87. I thought they were a little thicker than some of the men's and women's free fields. So, I mean, it's really impressive. Anytime you can come out there at senior nationals, toe the line, come away with a championship is not something to scoff at.
Absolutely. You mentioned some of the veterans at 77 kilograms. Two made the finals as Kendrick Sanders took on Patrick Smith. And, these are two guys who've been going and grinding on the Greco scene for a long time. But this match was Kendrick all the way. He got a 4 pretty early in the match with an arm spin and then followed it up. Kept the arm from the arm spin trapped, turned it into 2 guts, took an 8-0 victory. And I think, if Benji Peak is like the new wave of throwing people around and high scoring, Kendrick Sanders looks like a seasoned international Greco competitor, and it showed here once again. And it's hard to see him not representing the U.S. in the Olympics, in my opinion, going forward.
Yeah, Pat Smith's one of those guys that is in semifinals and finals seemingly every domestic event we see, and doesn't get 8-0 and doesn't really give up 8 points very often for that matter. A very, very tactical wrestler. Very, very smart and seasoned. So this was, for my money, the most important or impressive result of the finals. I thought Sanders just looked fantastic. And you got to say, as you just mentioned, kind of rounding into form at the right time with trials seemingly not far away.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about the 2020 trials being in 2021, but, we are here where we are. Another match that might be a preview of the trials at 87 kilograms, Alan Vera, formerly of Cuba, now representing the United States, really put it on Joe Rao. Joe Rao's a guy who's been the world team rep before. This was a 7-1 match. Vera got the opportunity to work on top early, scored a gut, and then he scored another takedown from the body lock at the end of the first period, I believe. In the second period, Joe Rao got his opportunity on top, couldn't score besides the 1-point passivity. And then Vera got another takedown as Rao was pushing at the end, 7-1. I believe these two have wrestled before, and I think this may be a changing of the guard because Joe Rao, like I said, constant on the Greco scene. We've seen him beat a lot of our best competitors here domestically, but I think that Vera in this tournament showed that he's the best wrestler at this weight. And our friend Jake Mathers was saying, who's going to beat Vera domestically, and I just don't see anyone else out there, to be honest.
Yeah, they wrestled, I want to say, at the Dave Schultz in the past without coming away. And this was, I want to say, also that Vera's first tournament as a U.S. national. I believe
so,
that is
yeah.
the case. If so, I'm curious to see if he's eligible to compete trials. Is he qualified to compete trials? I'll have to check on that one. But if so, I mean, anytime you come away with a 7-1 victory over Joe Rao, who's been at the top of that weight class for years, you have to consider Vera a favorite for the Olympic bid going forward. Looked very patient, kind of worked for his opportunities in this one. I thought looked like kind of a seasoned veteran and was really, really impressive and comes out of this one. If he's eligible for trials, is the favorite.
Yeah, you're talking about how he looks seasoned and he looks like a polished Greco guy. When he got his opportunity on top in the first period, I mean, it was like he just methodically worked into the grip, then he methodically worked into position, had the hip hop for the gut. I mean, it was like, if you were to watch a technique video on how to do a gut wrench, it was like that. So, and he's not just doing it to a practice dummy. I mean, Joe Rao's a legit competitor. So
yeah, I think sometimes you see with parterre, especially younger wrestlers in the U.S., but in the U.S. in general, they'll kind of get that parterre position and they'll rush to try to get their turn, being worried that they're going to get stood up. Whereas he was like, okay, like you said, kind of step by step, almost like you break it down in the technique video to get his points where, like I said, occasionally you'll get guys that will try to get to their position and go, and that'll lead to reversals or exposures of their own or not being able to get the turn, and that was not the case here.
All right, so we stick with the theme of new blood in Greco as Nick Boykin, who is currently I believe a redshirt freshman at Ohio State. He takes a 5-1 victory over Chad Porter. He defended an arm spin for an exposure and then got his opportunity on top for Wyatt passivity. Couldn't get the turn, but he led 3-0. Porter then kind of shot him off the mat with a high dive to get a point on the board, and then Boykin spun behind after another high dive attempt for all your scores. Like I said, a 5-1 victory for Boykin.
Yeah, Boykin's part of an emerging crew down there at the Ohio RTC with he and the two Kuntz brothers, at least some others, kind of building that Greco program. And I think this is a really, really nice accolade for him. I thought he's only, 20-year-old kid, 19-year-old kid, going to be redshirt freshman, spent some time in Colorado Springs as a member of the elite athlete program, or elite accelerator program. And I think it really showed. 97 is actually pretty strong for the U.S. In terms of Greco. So he's going to have some competition in his way when it comes to fighting for a spot in the Olympics for the next however many years. But I think this is a really nice result from a young kid who's really dedicated his career to Greco early on.
Absolutely. So at heavyweight, another case of a young wrestler making his name. I think everyone pretty much knows Cohlton Schultz. If he is not the present at heavyweight in Greco, he is certainly the future. He had a little trouble in this match. When he got his opportunity on top, he went for a gut wrench and he lost it and ended up on his back and had to fight off to avoid the fall. But he got back in the match with 3 straight step outs and he took a 4-2 victory. And Cohlton Schultz will be competing for Arizona State collegiately. And I have to say, if they do not add the push out to folk style, they should at least add it to heavyweight, because I would love to see Cohlton Schultz, just pushing everyone off the mat and scoring points. Because I pretty much think he could score a push out against every collegiate heavyweight that in the NCAA next year.
Yeah, Schultz is interesting. First of all, I mean, he was the heavy favorite in this field.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I had a little underwhelming finals and really throughout the tournament. But just a hoss of a wrestler, freakishly strong. And he still kind of got that, it's weird to say baby weight for a guy of his size, 20 years old, but he doesn't look overly defined. But I watched him in the room throw around Tanner Hall, who we'll talk about later, who's 7, 8 years older than he is, and every bit a full-grown man. Looked okay here, but again, gonna have to clean some things up, assuming that he's gonna have to deal with Adam Kuhn, Robbie Smith, wherever trials are, whenever trials are.
Yeah, and I think I agree with what you're saying about him, not necessarily having a man's body or a man's physique yet. I do, but I also see that maybe as a positive, because he's in these matches with Kuhn and Smith, and he is competitive and he is taking matches despite that. And I think that shows that, once the physical development comes, that's going to take him even further. I guess the real question is he going to take like 15 red shirts and wrestle collegiately into his 40s like Tanner Hall? That's what I want to know.
I also am very interested to see whether he wrestles for 4 years for Arizona State. Mm-hmm. Particularly being on the path that he is with Greco. Maybe he makes a team this next year. Does that change things? I mean, he's been a kid who, since probably a sophomore and junior year in high school, was very clear that his goals lied in Greco. So you kind of wonder if that doesn't change his path collegiately.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, even though Tanner Hall is not a Greco guy, he's a freestyle guy. I think the fact that he's still like associated with that program and still there, it has a lot to do with that. Because, you know, if you were a heavyweight who wanted to focus on Greco and you didn't have anyone in the collegiate room, that could be concerning. But I do think, at least for the time being, I think in my head anyway, that's part of the reason why this is working.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was down there last year for the Penn State Arizona State match, was in the room ahead of time. They seem to have a good relationship from what I saw, and have been drilling at the time. But again, really excited to watch Schultz develop and see where he's at relative to Adam Kuhn, who's probably the prohibitive favorite right now for the Olympic spot.
All right, so let's change gears and head over to women's freestyle starting at 50 kilograms. Sarah Hildebrandt, down at 50 kilograms, took an 8-0 dominant decision over Amy Fearnside. She scored with a throw by off the front headlock. She had an underhook to a far knee pick. She also then followed that up with a leg lace score. And at the end of the match, she hit a front headlock, cross leg cradle, and somehow this was only 2 points, even though it was feet to back. I don't really know how that works, but that's neither here nor there. Talk about the match, but also, you know, Hildebrandt being down at 50 kilograms. I think a lot of people were saying she looks kind of sucked out, but I also think that, you know, you make that trade when you move down in weight. Do you want the size advantage versus the physical deficit of cutting weight? And I kind of think that this is a good move for her. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, made the move probably, I want to say 6 months or so ago. She announced it, maybe less than that. Time has kind of been lost on me since March. But I thought she looked good. I mean, she looked a little sucked out, but I think that's going to be the case when you're coming down from 53 kilos, which is very light as is 50 kilos. But anybody that has seen Sarah outside competition knows she's not a very large human being.
Right.
So I don't know. She was managing weight well. I thought she looked as good as she has for the last few years, which is a world gold medalist contender for the last 2-3 years since the elbow injury. Looked really good here, looked quick, looked creative. I think her length is going to give girls problems at 50 kilos, where she's not huge, but she's taller than somebody like Vicky Anthony or Whit Condor, who she's going to have to be dealing with at 50 kilos. And I think that length is going to be an advantage on top. I think that strength is going to be an advantage on top. I'm really, really excited to see how this transition goes, particularly after making the way in 2-3 times.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned the reach and the length. I think not only would that be a bigger advantage at the lower weight, but I also think that she's not really someone who relies on, you know, explosive power. But the fact that she's, you know, able to work methodically through these positions, I think that being at the smaller weight and not having to put up with strength from the opposition makes that a more effective style. So I also think it's a good move, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
I think at 53, if you watch a lot of her Worlds matches, she was able to kind of get a hold of a leg from far out and shoot from space, or close a shin whizzer down, use that length to her advantage to score off of it. And I think that's only going to be exacerbated, assuming the weight's not an issue at 50. I'm very, very excited to see the progression of Sarah Hildebrandt.
All right, you mentioned 53 kilograms. Let's go there now. Katherine Shai. Moving in to the finals with the absence of Sarah Hildebrandt, she scored a 10-0 superiority victory over Ronna Heaton. I thought this was a bit of a physical match here. Shai was able to score multiple snap downs, spun behind. She did a straight head snap down. She also had a Russian arm snap down. She also got working with her leg attacks as she scored a single leg, and also scored with a crotch lift. So, I mean, I thought that this was a very impressive performance. I'm curious to see, you know, where Shai goes at this weight, but I thought that this was about as dominant as one could be, both physically and technically.
Yeah, I think it was a big sign of the gap sometimes between somebody like Shai, who's been on the scene for a little while, and somebody like Heaton, who's very talented, but is very early in her senior level career. I thought it was a very methodical performance by Shai, whose story is really impressive after spending some time away from the mat. Coming back and really putting herself in the thick of things at 53 kilos. Obviously, right now that's probably Jakara Winchester's weight, but I mean, the way that Katherine Shai looked, there's no reason that she can't be out there pushing her. Shai was really impressive throughout the tournament, and I thought looked the favorite in each of her matches and never really wavered from that. I'm interested to see Heaton's progression, but I think like we said, she's a little early on in her career to be challenging the likes of Katherine Shai, but to make a senior final, even under these circumstances, is really impressive.
Yeah, and I watched, the rest of her matches in the tournament, and I thought Heaton, you can see this is someone who's clearly learning on the job and putting things together. Unfortunately, she ran into someone who was just, had the veteran edge and the physical edge, but I do think that there's bright future there, and she had some really clean takedowns in her earlier matches, so cause for hope there as well. All right, we're going to move up to 57 kilograms. And really the story of the women's bracket was Xochitl Mota-Pettis. She scored an upset over Allie Reagan coming up the tournament with a headlock. Unfortunately, she was on the wrong end of it here as she had a lead going into the end of the match, and she ended up getting headlocked for 4 and surrendered the fall. Before that, there was really good technical interplay here from the pummeling over under position. I thought early in the match, Mota-Pettis was, the one who got the better of it. She scored an ankle pick from the underhook. She also faked that and then went into a single and scored. And then Lauren Louive, she got away from that position and she started working off a 2-on-1 and a Russian arm. And then late in the match, she went back to it. And I was like, well, this is not going to work in her favor. This is the position that XMP was owning earlier. And instead, she was able to get the headlock and score the fall shortly after giving up a lateral drop from that position. So really a back and forth match. And this probably was the match of the finals as well.
First of all, I want to thank you for saying Xochitl Mota-Pettis' name, because I have long wondered how that's actually pronounced.
I looked it up and watched YouTube videos. So
I will stick with XMP, which I think is a really awesome nickname.
It is a great name, yes.
Before giving credit where credit is due to Lauren Louive, I'm going to brag on Mota-Pettis, who, first of all, sent Allie Reagan's head just about flying through the third row of the arena in that match. If y'all have not seen that match, go back and watch the nasty, nasty headlock to lock up that upset. But Mota-Pettis, I thought, for me, outside of not winning, which is, again, kind of unfair to Lauren Louive, was one of the most impressive wrestlers in the tournament, regardless of bracket or weight. I thought she looked really good. She looked confident in attacks to both sides, kind of left it all out there. Also, just really, really strong. I think sometimes when we talk about women's matches, we don't talk about physical attributes the way we talk about men. When you look at Mota-Pettis, the way she's built, she's powerful. Very strong through her back, very tough to score on. It was kind of pushing girls around, and you saw it early in the finals match with Louive, where she kind of got up. And then Louive kind of grew into the match, learned how to deal with that, started to find some angles. But I was really impressed with Mota-Pettis throughout the tournament. And then to that point, I was impressed with Louive's ability to kind of grow into this match. So early, you see things go wrong for wrestlers to fall behind early in the match, and you'll see kind of a head drop, or they'll kind of try to go to the same things, where she kind of started moving in and out a little more, was on the head a little more, worked some angles, and then the combination there at the end to get the fall, the headlock was nasty. A really, really enjoyable match. And for me, probably the most exciting bracket of the tournament, regardless of men's or women's.
Absolutely. And I think that that win that XMP had over Allie Reagan, not only was it very impressive to get the headlock and get the fall, but it's not like Reagan was having a tournament off, because, to preview the stats article like I did earlier, I mean, Allie Reagan had the highest point differential of all the female competitors in all weights. So points per minute minus points against per minute, even with the loss, Reagan had the highest rate. So Reagan was on and having a good tournament, and XMP still got the victory. So impressive win there for sure. Couldn't get it done here in the finals, but like I said, I mean, she was in the driver's seat looking to win this match before the late headlock. So this is definitely someone we need to watch going forward at 57 kilograms.
Probably, assuming health, you would think that Helen Maroulis goes into trials as the favorite here. But a super, super exciting bracket all of a sudden behind her, where you kind of lean Reagan. Obviously, Reagan has the credentials, and you've seen it before. You mentioned the point differential came back really well on the backside. But, I mean, we just saw that anything could happen, so it's going to be very interesting to see what happens leading up there at 57 kilos for the women.
All right, moving up to 67 kilograms, Jennifer Page gets it done 4-3 over Macey Kilty. So this match was, let me see here, it was 3-3 late in the match, and Kilty tried to throw her hips over from like the quad pod position, and it looked like she exposed, and then they reviewed it, and I guess they determined that it was a step out.
Was that how that was scored?
Yeah, so
I
it
could
was
not
3-3.
tell.
Yeah.
It looked like it was 3-0, and I thought they gave her 4, or it was it was 3-1 at one point, and they gave her like 2 for the exposure and then a step out.
Well, so it was 3-1, and then Page scored a takedown.
Okay.
And then Kilty started working up for some reason from the bottom instead of just like basing out and waiting for the referee stoppage. She like went back to the quad pod. And then from the quad pod, she tried to hip over, and it looked like she didn't make it all the way over and exposed.
Clearly exposed.
Clearly exposed. Then she stood back up again, and then Paige tried to sort of like muscle her over from like a standing position. And then I think they called the step out on that motion because they did not award the exposure because they scored the takedown for Paige, and then they went to review and they came back with 1. So it went from 7-3 to 4-1. The winner was the same, but I I don't really know what they were looking at on the view because she clearly exposed.
And more so, this was a match for anybody who saw it. That Macey Kilty controlled the first 5 minutes and 25 seconds or so of this match. Gave up a step out, 3-1, looked fine. Got in on a leg, ended up in a scramble position with it, I believe. Ended up without a score to keep it 3-1 with about 15, 20 seconds. And then was in quad pod. I thought the way that I thought it was scored, and granted I was watching this without commentary and they didn't really clarify it. It almost looked like Kilty was in the quad pod and kind of like tried to stand up and expose. That I thought they scored that 3-3 for exposure, and then there was a step out to make it 4-3.
Okay, that would make sense. Like maybe they didn't award the takedown, and then they awarded the exposure.
Because I never saw 3 points of contact when Kilty was in the quad pod. She almost kind of like stood up and then like got thrown over the top, her back exposed. That would have made it 3-3, and then she went out of bounds to make it 4-3. But it was a very, very strange sequence where I kind of get where Kilty was at if they had not given the 2, because if she gives up the 2, then she's trailing on criteria with 8-9 seconds to go, and was in a pretty bad position nonetheless. It was a very, very strange scoring sequence, and a really impressive performance to close late from Jennifer Page against a lot of people, or Macey Kilty, who I think a lot of people think is the heir apparent with this weight.
Yeah, I think that, like, I agree Page deserved to win, regardless of the scoring. But I think that Kilty, this is one of those things where she gets more experience, she watches this match back, she's going to have a lot of questions because all Page's points were scored off Kilty's actions. So if she is able to, shut it down or even be a little bit more conservative with her actions, I think she wins this match because, when Paige got behind, it was off a sort of lazy shot from Kilty. And then, like we talked about, she hipped over. So, these are all things that she has control over. And I think that that's the kind of stuff that comes. And, being in a U.S. Nationals final is where you get that experience. So we see that. But not to take anything away from Paige, I mean, she had to be there and she had to keep coming over at the end, even after struggling early in the match.
Yeah, I think it's a situation, too, where 62 kilos is a kind of strange weight. I think Kayla Miracle would probably be the favorite right now, but you've got Kayla Miracle, you've got Mallory Velty, you've got Julia Salati, you've now got Macey Kilty and Jennifer Page. I mean, would you be surprised if any 5 of those girls, and I'm sure there's probably people I'm forgetting, ended up on the team?
Right.
I certainly wouldn't.
Yeah. So moving up to 68 kilograms, Forrest Molinari got it done over Skylar Grote. This was definitely a bit of a physical mismatch. Molinari was basically able to move forward, was able to snap down. At one point, she sort of hit a snap and then another snap and spun behind. And the final score was 5-1. She got the fall late in the second period. She got to the front headlock position and kind of threw it forward, and Grote was stuck, and that was the end. So definitely, I think this is a different generation. Grote's younger and coming up. Molinari's a veteran, been around, and I think that with the physical aspect was really the difference between the two.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised to see that Molinari opted for 68 over 62. Had been at 65 in non-Olympic years, and is now going into the weight with Tamira Scott. But she looked good. She looked strong. Right now, I think that's probably the premier match for me in terms of qualifiers, and domestically for women is Tamira and Forrest Molinari. So I'm really amped to see that, which means I'm sure something will happen along the way to make sure we don't. But I was very, very impressed with Forrest throughout, even in a field that may not have been the strongest, but I mean, you still have to go out there and do what you do, and I thought she looked as good as she had at 65.
All right, and in the final weight for the women, Adeline Gray at 76 kilograms takes a 10-0 over Victoria Francis. This was, dominant as usual. She scored an exposure while she was draped over the top of a Francis shot. Then she was able to score from distance. Then she stopped a shot from distance from Francis, spun behind, and from there it was 3 straight gut wrenches to finish the match. I think, after the 2016 Olympics, Gray has sort of been on like a quest of redemption and self-discovery, so to speak. And I think that she seems to be putting it together and peaking at the right time. And her recent results have shown this is a match that I believe we've seen multiple times before. And the result was not really in question per se, but it's good to see Gray take care of business when she's the favorite, because those are the matches you have to win in tournaments. This
is not a knock on Adeline Gray, obviously, and her technique is very good, but she is so hilariously strong.
Yeah.
Some of the positions she scores from, particularly against somebody like Vicky Francis, who doesn't really give up a ton of points, unless it's against Adeline Gray, is really, really impressive. And every time I watch her, I'm like, oh, like that looked really, really easy. I think you nailed it. I think after this point in 2016, she came back with a vengeance, and you don't want to put that curse on her after thinking she was a heavy favorite going in 2016. But I think even with a really strong weight class in 2021, she's the clear favorite for me.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that, she's so strong and she makes it look easy. I mistakenly said that it was a gut wrench that finished it off. It was actually a double. And it kind of seemed like it was almost like a basketball play in the sense that, like, the clock was running down and she was like, okay, now it's time to double this person and take the match. And it just happened. And, that's the technique we know and the technique we've seen from Gray, out there with a blonde head of hair this time. So perhaps that's the new way. We'll see how it goes.
Fashion statement. Going full Dennis Rodman.
Absolutely. All right, so let's switch gears to men's freestyle. We're going to start at 57 kilograms. Cornell representative Vito Arajo taking on Michigan, somewhat unheralded. I saw you on Twitter spreading the good word of Dylan Ragusin, who a lot of people were surprised by, but he's had results before, and he's coming at Michigan. He had a great tournament to make the finals. Unfortunately, that kind of ran out here against Vito. He hung with him early. He scored a step out from the overhook, and he also, I believe he countered a shot from Vito and got the exposure. He was leading 3-2, and then Vito got on top and finished it up with a leg lace and multiple wrist roll tilt throughs, and that was pretty much it for Arajo. Took the final score 13-3.
Yeah, I think the result here wasn't a huge surprise. I just think in terms of where they're at in their development and how much freestyle they've wrestled, Arajo's just very, very far ahead of where Ragusin's at. But Ragusin's weekend, I think, was the biggest surprise for a lot of people. It was, like you said, a name that I kept kind of getting at. It's like, hey, who is this kid?
Right.
Really impressive high school results, but mostly in folk style. Montini Catholic kid at Illinois, I want to say an Izzy style kid as well. Actually, Richard, you'll find this interesting, wrestled a lot with Clay Guida, former UFC star, as an assistant, I believe, at Montini. But really, really interesting to see him take this big of a jump so soon. If you're a Michigan fan, you got to be really excited there. Always kind of found himself fifth or sixth nationally at the high school level, but behind big names for those who follow the high school scene in terms of like a Ryan Kirkham or a Bouzakis or Robbie Howard. So it was kind of struggled to break into that level, but really, really impressive weekend for him. And Vito, I mean, what can you say? We kind of know where he's at, and he's going to be a kid that I think is probably, for me, I think is right there right behind that top tier 57 kilos. And if he were a finalist for trials, I would not be surprised.
Yeah, I think a theme for this, the men's tournament for freestyle, was guys who compete in folk style but are clearly better in freestyle. And I think Vito is one of those guys. We're going to talk about Alirez. We're going to talk about Anthony Valencia. These guys are up and down the bracket. And I think that Vito, I mean, you know, we saw when he took out Nick Suriano and those guys at the last U.S. Nationals that he was a going force in freestyle. And I think his performance in this tournament solidified it. It was almost like, you know, Dylan was very competitive with him on the feet, but the minute it got to parterre, it was like an entirely different game. And I think that his ability to turn with the leg lace, and he had like the tilt hold in this one, but he's turned people with guts. I mean, his parterre is a difference maker, and it showed here, and it'll show against other people that those who only follow folk style may think, oh, well, this guy's going to take Vito. And then the parterre is going to be a difference maker there too.
Yeah, he's a very, very good folk style wrestler. He's a great, at least domestically, freestyle wrestler. And even at U23s, where he was not far away from a gold medal, I think we saw just how good Vito can be, especially he's a long kid. Not having any issues with making 57 is really impressive. But I would definitely put him, I want to see more of Spencer Lee. I think Spencer Lee is the favorite right now at 57 kilos, assuming that he attempts to make the Olympic team, which I'd be really sad if he didn't. But I think he's absolutely right there with the Thomas Gilmans and Dayton Fixes of the world with 57 kilos.
So I'm looking now at the Michigan roster, or at least Russell stat for Michigan, and they have Ragusin up at 133. And I guess my next question was, you know, we have Jack Medley, who was the starter there last year, Kurt McHenry, who was a highly recruited guy who may end up being too small, at least for a season or two. With those three guys, I mean, how do you see that working out at 125? Do you think it's, you know, Medley for a next year or two? Or, you know, what do you think is ultimately going to be the best lineup for Michigan at that weight?
You know, it's hard to project this year because who knows what's going to happen with anything. But theoretically, if there's a tournament and everyone's healthy, I think Michigan's going to go for it. It's a very weird situation where you're going to have all the guys they had sit out last year probably wanting to make the team again this year. In terms of the Olympic team, you're going to see Miles Amin's going to go to the Olympics. He's already qualified. Malik Amin, I believe, is going to try to make the Olympics. Mason Paris, Logan Massa. But lineup-wise, there's no reason that all those guys wrestle. They can't compete. Maybe if not challenge Iowa, probably challenge for second or third. And if that's the situation and Ragusin looks good out of the gates, I don't mean to knock Jack Medley. I don't know where he's at. Wise, we wouldn't expect him, at least last year, to have been a point scorer in NCAAs. And I think, like you said with McHenry, he's probably a little while away in terms of physical maturity. Wrestled 113 as a high school senior, and top and bottom in terms of folk style was not his strength. I think if you see Ragusin step in and if he's able to convert his growth in freestyle to folk style, why not? Maybe he's the guy you see in the lineup at 125.
All right, so let's move back up to 65 kilograms. Andrew Alirez of University of Northern Colorado taking a 5-1 victory over Evan Henderson. You know, Alirez in freestyle, if he is able to, you know, create his distance, he'll get to the ties, he'll break the tie, and then he'll initiate his offense. It's very hard to stop. He had a double to single in this. He then kept the pressure on, forced a shot out of Henderson, and spun behind for his 2 takedowns. And that was pretty much his scoring. Like I said, 5-1. I think Alirez, I considered, when I looked at the bracket when it came out, I thought Alirez was a guy who could be a dark horse. He was going to be my breakout guy for the tournament. I think I was kind of saying it was a long shot when predicting he would win it, but he did. And I also think, you know, for fans of folk style, I think that the way he wrestles freestyle is easily transferable to folk style. Mm-hmm. He has a style that's very similar to like Kyle Snyder, where he's takedowns only. You know, he avoids and limits his time on the bottom. He limits his time on the top, and he just scores takedowns, owns the hand fight, and he wins those like 8-4 matches that aren't really that close.
Yeah, that single leg to the right hand side is just nasty. I mean, he was in on everybody all day. Elite high school prospect in terms of folk style. who's number one winner, number one kid in the country coming out in terms of his weight class, and just looked fantastic throughout the tournament. Won't get in there and bang, heavy on the head, good hand fighter, can attack to both sides, can double off. What more can you say about Andrew Liras? I thought he was super, super impressive in this one. And I think he's going to keep that momentum rolling in terms of college the rest of this year. Only 19, 20 years old. Great attitude, really nice kid for anybody who's talked to him. I was really, really impressed with him in this one throughout the tournament.
Yeah, and I think that whole program in Northern Colorado is going to be something. I think that they've really, identified the need. They're recruiting locally, sort of picking up a lot of good prospects out of their home state and the surrounding area. And, I don't think that they're a team that's going to be a position to win the Big 12 in the next, 5 years. But, I look at the lineup and I'm like, there's some guys there that are exciting, guys that are good, solid wrestlers. And I think that Liras is really going to be a program changer for them. He didn't really have the results this year, but I think that there was injuries involved and, experience. But I'm really excited to watch that program and Liras.
On top of talent with guys like Liras, guys like Mosha Schwartz, who we spoke about earlier, Theorius Robeson, they seem to really have created a very good culture. Mm-hmm. And I think it's one where they're going to have guys that want to come there and wrestle for Troy Nickerson and Montero. A really, really good staff there, group of good guys. I'm very excited to see how that program moves forward.
All right, so we are also going to move forward. We talked a little bit about Michigan, and a stalwart of their lineup will probably be Logan Massa. He dominates Anthony Valencia, takes a 15-2 victory. Massa has been on a roll since about November of 2019. We talked about him 2 episodes ago when he upset Beckside and got that victory at the NLWC event, and this tournament was just another example of it. And I think what really stood out to me in this match was just the physical strength. I mean, he was moving Anthony Valencia around. There was at one point he had a front headlock, and he decided to just let go of his own front headlock and immediately get on a shot. And it was like he just froze Valencia with the front headlock. He just went like this, and Valencia couldn't move. And he got to the body from every shot pretty much. He lifted, he elevated, he drove Valencia almost all the way to the other mat. I mean, this was just a physical match. And I think Massa's always wanted to be this wrestler, and he had a style that was I'm going to push you around the mat, but maybe the physicality wasn't there. And it seems that his idea of who he is as a wrestler and his body is catching up, and it's going to be interesting to see for sure.
I think this is also probably the longest Logan Massa has gone without being injured since after his freshman year. Had dealt with multiple knee injuries, and I think that was really big in terms of not just his growth physically. I mean, he's big, but mentally, I think he's really, really confident in what he's doing out there. He's not going out there worried that something might get tweaked or something might turn. And I think that confidence is huge. You saw it in the Beckside match. We saw it here. Anthony Valencia was kind of throwing guys around the mat up until this match. And we see that he's a guy who is very confident in terms of freestyle, his ability to explode, and Logan Massa just shut that down almost completely. It's going to be very, very interesting to see where Massa fits in the fold at 74 kilos, which is going to be just a loaded bracket at trials. Obviously, Burroughs and Dake are the headliners, but you have a Jason Nolf, you have an Isaiah Martinez who's not afraid to be physical at all. That's a match that I would love to see in terms of Massa and Martinez. But right now, I think that if you could tell Logan Massa that trials are next month, he would be stoked because he's as confident as I've seen him in 3-4 years.
Absolutely. I think, you talked about him going forward at the trials, and that is going to be a killer weight. I'm curious about the college season, if he goes back, 65 or 74. I think that'll say a lot. I think both of those weights have interesting matches. He has sort of a rivalry with Alex Marinelli of Iowa. I think his style would play very well against Michael Kemmerer of Iowa. So I think that there's a lot of interesting matches for him coming up, both freestyle, folk style.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned those two. You could potentially have a matchup with Mekhi Lewis, another guy who, has dealt with the strength of Vincenzo Joseph as well as anybody in college outside of Alex Marinelli has. So that could be really interesting, and it goes back to the conversation we had about Michigan about, okay, you've got all these guys. You've got Paris and Massa and Amin. You got 3 legitimate national title threats right there, in my opinion, or 2.5, depending on what you want to say with Massa. Where are they at? Are you going for it? So I think from a college perspective, that's something that's really exciting. If you're a Michigan fan, like, you got to be salivating.
Absolutely. So this next match we're going to talk about is the final at 86 kilograms. Gabe Dean, formerly of Cornell, took about 2 years off, came back at this tournament, and surprisingly got the victory, defeated Nate Jackson in the finals. I'd love to talk about this match. Unfortunately, there were 2 points scored, and they were both via the shot clock. So I don't really have much to run down there. Another ringing endorsement for those who love criteria, that we can see a match with literally no scoring. Yeah, I believe that these two are both entered in that Wacky Flow tournament.
Yes, they are.
So perhaps we will get another 1-1 match in that tournament. I look forward to that. No, I'm kidding.
The funny thing is, I think Gabe Dean mentioned somebody in one of the Zoom media sessions that the reason he entered Senior Nationals was to say tune-up for that tournament. Mm-hmm. Gabe Dean, who was otherwise retired, and just comes out of retirement to win Senior Nationals. Now, I'm not going to put an asterisk on it, but not exactly the 86 kilo field that you would expect to see. Still, come out of retirement to win Senior Nationals makes it really interesting. I was a little disappointed in Jackson, who had been 79 kilos prior to this year, I believe. So it's kind of pretty big jump up. But for Gabe Dean, the finals, obviously, I think he would have liked to score his own points, but it was also a very Gabe Dean match where he's like, okay, I'm going to control the tempo and pace, and any flurries that we have is going to be because I start the exchange.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to, I don't really want to take anything away from him. He won Senior Nationals. He won this final. I did get the impression that Nate Jackson was the aggressor, but just Dean's defense was too much. He couldn't really get inside, and that's just the way it is. I mean, it's hard for me to even say anything because whenever I think about the match, I start thinking about ways we could do overtime that wouldn't be so intrusive, and it's not going to happen. So.
And here's the thing: we could have this conversation for half an hour another day. I am actually not a huge hater of criteria, mm-hmm. but in a situation where there are 0 offensive points scored in the match, the match shouldn't end.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
Let's leave it there. And hopefully if they do meet again in the what I dubbed the Wacky Flow tournament, there are more points scored. So we move up to 97 kilograms. Recent Ohio State wrestler, now full-time on the freestyle, Colin Moore gets it done over Kyvan Gadsden, 12-5. Gadsden scored early in the match with a chest wrap. Then it was basically it was all Moore after that. He scored 12 points there for the rest of the match. He got to a duck under. He got to a low single leg. He was able to score with a gut wrench, which he set up with a figure 4 on the leg, which I thought was pretty awesome. But I do think the biggest story of this match was his ability to score with that low single. It was quick. It was powerful. Gadsden really didn't have the opportunity to react to it because it knocked him off balance every time it landed. And Gadsden, I interviewed Gadsden before his match at Wrestling Underground against Nick Gwiazdowski, and I thought that he was saying the right things. His training situation sounded very solid for him. It seemed like he was right in the right headspace, and he did not get it done against Gwiz. And then in this tournament, he had a very impressive tournament. He was up 5-0 on Kyle Snyder before Kyle Snyder, forfeited due to injury. But I do think that everything that I got when I interviewed Gadsden showed in this tournament, but unfortunately Moore had the better offense and was quicker and, had the better game plan for this match.
Yeah, Moore, former U23 world team member, was really impressive. Kind of snuck by Ty Walls in the quarterfinals 4-4 on criteria. Had an impressive 6-5 win in the semis over Hayden Zomer, who I thought was the favorite for me to make the finals opposite Kyle Snyder. Obviously, some things happened in the Snyder match with regards to injury that switched that up. But that, for me, was the most impressive win that Moore had in the tournament. I really like Zomer. I think he's a really talented guy. In the finals, looked fantastic. Switched up his attacks, had the single, was able to move Kyvan around. I thought Kyvan looked a little big for 97, a little heavy. But when there's two options for Olympic weights and he's not making 86, you got to do what you got to do. I don't know how much we can really take away from this in terms of results at 97. We didn't have Mike Machiavello, who I think is probably the third or fourth guy on the ladder at 97. And then obviously Snyder and Jaden Cox are the really, really big favorites to make the finals, but really impressive showing by Moore in the lead up to the finals and then in the finals itself.
Absolutely. You mentioned Hayden Zomer. I think that him being in the 97 weight class is like one of the best things that could happen, because it's almost like we've seen a lot of these guys come in and it's like, oh, you're a college guy, you know, you may have All-American, but now you got to deal with this guy and he's going to try to, you know, control the pace, get that one takedown and beat you 3-1. So what are you going to do? And I think the fact that Moore was able to get by that in a high stakes semifinal was impressive for him. And, you know, also he got it done in the finals. So impressive performance from Moore, but I agree with your sentiment that the heavy hitters, with the exception of Snyder, were absent from this tournament. And they're not going to be absent when trials come around. So there you go. All right, we have reached the final match we are going to talk about at 120 kilograms in men's freestyle. Mason Paris takes a 12-2 victory over Tanner Hall, the second Arizona State guy in the room. Well, formerly of Arizona State, but still in the room with Cohlton, Schultz, Tanner Hall. Mason Paris was able to score with pretty much anything he wanted in this match. He got a dump early for 2 points. Hall turned it into a chest wrap, scored 2 points of his own, but then Paris finished the shot to go up 4-2. From there, he was on top, scored a gut wrench to push that to 6-2. He then hit a double leg when they were back on their feet, and he avoided getting exposed on the chest wrap this time. And then it was 2 more guts to close it out. Mason Paris, a guy who, you know, he had the huge breakthrough at U23s, won the world championship there. And then he had a great year this year in college as well. Didn't really get a chance to go into the tournament, but everyone was looking forward to that Mason Paris-Gable rematch, or Gable-Stevenson rematch. And, you know, he just keeps on coming, and this was a very impressive performance. Tanner Hall's not a guy who, you know, is really a threat to make the Olympic team or anything like that, but he's shown for years and years and years that he's a, you know, a guy you're going to have to deal with on the ladder, and Paris made quick work of him.
Yeah, we talked about it after the, I want to say the Beat the Streets event. Mason Paris needs to be talked about as a potential representative for the U.S. next year in the Olympics, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yeah.
I think that's, we all kind of thought that beforehand, and I'm not sure this in particular is showing proved that, but he's got the win over Zaire at U23. He's Zaire has a win over Gwizdowski that I want to say was legitimately 10 push-out points. If anybody can research that, I believe it's out there
that's
somewhere.
True.
Which is one of the more incredible things I've ever seen. But Mason Paris is a kid who sparingly, if at all, wrestled freestyle in high school, was a very strong football prospect. So in the offseason did a lot of football and has just grown leaps and bounds after walking in the Michigan room, which I think anybody who followed along beforehand probably could have told you what had happened, is a really, really high-level athlete for that weight. We've only seen him and Gable, I believe, the once in terms of the Big Ten, but we haven't yet seen it in freestyle. Paris has lost to Anthony Cassiope in freestyle, but that was back in high school, and I think Mason Paris, like we said, has really taken big strides. And man, far be it for me to pick Mason Paris to be the Olympic team rep, but I'd really struggle to pick against him right now.
So I want to make a correction. I said Paris won U23. It was actually Junior Worlds.
Juniors.
Yes, my bad on that. But, yeah, and I think watching his performances in, I believe it was Fargo when he wrestled Cassiope, and Cassiope rolled him up.
Yep.
And then watching him wrestle in folk style this year.
It's not the same wrestler.
It's not the same, but I mean, it's not the same sport, but it was a completely different match. I mean, Cassiope was the one who was having the physical struggles, and, you know, Paris was getting to basically what he wanted. And now Paris is making strides in freestyle. I mean, I think that anytime you see development like that, you got to be worried because one more step forward and he's right there with Gable and he's right there with, some of the other heavyweights we have.
Mason Paris in high school was a very good football linebacker who wrestled in the offseason, and because he was so strong and so athletic, was a very good wrestler.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's a linebacker in terms of athleticism who's really, really good at wrestling and is just 20 or 21 years old and is in a room with guys who are going to make him much, much better. And I think until Gwiz loses a spot, it's Gwiz's spot, obviously, but look out with Gable and Gwiz and Kirk Flight. The next wave of heavyweights right now between 19 to 21 years old or 19, 22 years old is something the U.S. hasn't seen in a long, long time.
Absolutely. Well, I will leave that there, and that will conclude our recap of the U.S. Nationals Finals for 2020. Clay, this is the time where we talk about plugs. What do you have to plug?
Again, we're starting some wrestling coverage up at Black Shoe Diaries. Come check us out over there at SB Nation. You can follow me at ByCSauertieg. I will have my name either in the YouTube link. You can follow me there. Other than that, check us out. Again, trying to get over 1,000 views here. Share with a friend, and we appreciate you guys tuning in.
Absolutely. As I mentioned twice already on this podcast, I do have a stat recap of U.S. Nationals coming up on Intermat, hopefully Tuesday, Wednesday, maybe Thursday. Not really sure what I have other than that. Going to have some big UFC stuff to work on this week, so I will be busy with that. Well, thank you, Clay, and I'm sure we'll be back on here before too long.
Appreciate it. Thanks, guys.